All right, this week here in Off the Court, we have a special guest with us, Dante Calabria, former star basketball player at the University of North Carolina and overseas star, played in Europe for many seasons. Also a personal friend of mine, a guy that I grew up around as a youngster in high school and in college, and is also familiar to Thailand basketball circles. He's been here twice. He's also helped some Thai youth players get to the United States. So we're really happy to have you with us, Coach.
Hey, it's great to be here and great to catch up with you, Dave.
Okay, let's get started here. I'll ask you a couple questions about your early years in basketball. So, how did you get introduced to the game of basketball?
My father played. He played at the collegiate level at University of Iowa, and then had a brief stint in the CBA. Back in the old CBA days in the United States. And, so I was kind of born into it. I had an uncle that played and was pretty good. So I was kind of born into it. And my dad just put a basket up, and I kind of just migrated to dribbling the ball and playing with the ball at a really, really early age.
You mentioned that you had a father who played briefly as a professional, played Division I basketball. What was that like, and did that add any pressure to you as a youngster growing up?
I wouldn't say as a youngster. I mean, he worked with me, but I never felt any pressure. When I got to high school is when a lot of the comparisons started, and being that I grew up very close to where my father played high school basketball. In fact, we played them in the same section, his school. The older guys, the people that were around when he was there, would always compare us and talk about the different styles. And that's when I started to feel a little bit of it. But, my father never put pressure on me at all. When he saw that that's what I wanted to do, he pushed me a little harder. He pushed me to be better. But, I never felt pressure from my dad. It was more other people just comparing and well, Chad did this and Dante did that, that kind of thing. But from the inside, from my family, from my father, I never felt it.
Now, as a youth athlete, you were also a very talented baseball player and American football player. What ultimately led you to choose basketball over those other sports?
My first love is baseball. Love it. I just wasn't. I was good. I just wasn't that good. I love playing baseball. I love football also, but it's a funny story. I think I've told you this. I was a freshman. I played freshman football in high school. And after practice, almost every day, I'd go up into the gym up in Blackhawk, and you've been there, so you know what I'm talking about. You come up the steps from the locker room, and I would start playing and pick up games and stuff like that. And one day, the coach came and grabbed me and said, "Hey, you can't play basketball." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, you can't play basketball during football season." I said, "Well, I just finished practice." He's like, "Yeah, but this is football season. You can't play basketball." And so I kind of took that. I left, and the next morning I took my equipment, put it on the desk, and just said, "I'm no longer going to play football, so now I can play basketball." And that was the end of my football. But I did love it. I did like it a lot. I was quarterback, and I'm not a small guy, as you know. I'm 6'5". Who knows what could have happened, but it wasn't my first love, and I did it because I enjoyed it. But basketball was what I was best at. I think I had the biggest and best chance of making it to the next level as a basketball player.
Now, once you decided to become, focus on your full effort and so forth on basketball, you were a state champion in high school. You're also the Pennsylvania State Player of the Year, big school. Talk a little bit about your school basketball experience and how that had an impact on you.
Well, high school basketball was great. We were really good. We had a coach that was John Miller, who's probably one of the best in the state, but also one of the best high school coaches in the country. We ran a style of offense, shot a lot of threes, pushed the ball, pressed before that was popular. And so we were able to do a lot of different things in high school. Fortunately, we had a core group of about 4 or 5 guys that only played basketball. So we were together all year. We would enter again, nowadays you can play in summer leagues, fall leagues, all those things. But you remember back in our day, we didn't really have that. We would go to the playground and play pickup, or we would get in little tournaments and play as a group, and then we'd pick up one or two guys that were younger to come play with us. So we really knew each other inside and out. We played with each other. We knew on a penetration where the guy was going to be kicked out to. We knew what guys could do, what guys couldn't do, and it really, really benefited us when we would get into really, really tough games in high school. We were just comfortable because we had been in so many of them together. But my high school experience was great. My last 2 years, we were 62 or 65-2, something like that. And it's ironic that we lost 2 games in a row. We lost the state semifinal to Perry, and then lost the first game of the year in the War Memorial Tournament in Johnstown to Dunbar, who was the number 1 ranked team in the country at the time. And we actually gave them a really good game. We kind of dominated throughout the county there and throughout the state the last 2 years of playing.
Okay, let's transition a little bit from your high school experience to now you're going into college. So I know a lot of kids over here, their dream is to play basketball at the college level in the United States. So talk with our listeners a little bit about the recruiting process, maybe some of the schools that you were most interested in, maybe like a top 3 or a top 5, and what factors ultimately led you to choosing North Carolina?
So the style of recruiting has changed drastically since I was recruited. When I was there, I used to have college coaches waiting at my driveway 4 and 5 at a time as I would come home from school. It was crazy. Every day at school, you would have a college coach that would showed up, and I was recruited by pretty much all the Division I schools. And by all, I'm saying if it was 330 schools, I received either phone calls, letters, talked to the coaches of about 300 of them. So, we're talking about a high number. It was different. I mean, you would get 5, 6, 7, 8 phone calls a night. And so being that Coach Miller had experience in the recruiting process from Sean, who was at Pitt, we quickly narrowed that down. And so I had a list of about 15, 20 schools, then it got to 15, then it got to 10, and ultimately it got to 5. And my final 5 were University of Pittsburgh, University of North Carolina, University of Iowa, Villanova University, and Florida State. And so those were my final 5 schools. Iowa was there because my father went there, and I used to go there as a kid, and I loved the program. I loved the tradition. I loved the school. I don't know who has been to Iowa City, but the University of Iowa makes up Iowa City. And so it was really a unique thing. And then I went to North Carolina, and it was the same thing. Chapel Hill was the University of North Carolina. And so those 2 schools were really, really neat to me. Villanova was a little different. Coach Massimino was there. There was kind of like an Italian connection there. And I really liked Coach Mass. It turned out that he would leave Villanova, actually, when I would have been going in as a freshman to go to UNLV. And I probably would have, if I would have gone to Villanova, I probably would have left with him, as I would have gone there for Coach Mass. But that's a little bit different of a school, smaller school, right outside Philadelphia. So it was really contrasting to Iowa and North Carolina. Obviously, you're familiar with Pittsburgh, a city school, different environment, kind of like Villanova, but much bigger. And then Florida State down in Florida was a whole different world. Tallahassee, even though it's the state capital of Florida, Florida State is really, really big, has a big imprint in Tallahassee. But of those 5 schools, the reason I went to North Carolina was the tradition of the basketball program, a chance to get away from where I grew up, to go south, and Coach Smith played a big role of being able to play for Coach Smith. You had Coach Ford there, Coach Hanner, Coach Will. All those guys have been through the program, been successful. So I ultimately went to Carolina, which I, in hindsight, I feel was the best choice for me, David, because obviously it came from a winning program. We won a national championship, played in the second Final Four, won ACC championships, regular season tournament. So had a lot of success. And the ACC at that time was by far the best conference in the country. So we were playing against really, really top guys. A lot of guys went on to be future stars in the NBA, stars in Europe. So every day was a battle, not only in practice, but then you went to play the game, and it was just a lot of fun, a lot of competition, tough games, learned a lot, played with great players. So as I look back, I wouldn't want to change anything.
We'll talk a little bit here in Thailand. Whilst a lot of kids would like to play basketball in the United States, think it's a dream for them. They might not be as familiar with the tradition surrounding college basketball or the NCAA as we would be. So talk to them a little bit about the tradition in North Carolina, some of the players who have been there, the success they've had, the program they have, so that they're really familiar with what you were a part of.
Well, Carolina in particular, I mean, when you think of it, Coach Smith was there 36 years. 30 of those years consecutively, I think it's maybe 32, they made the NCAA tournament, which is unheard of. Number one, it's unheard of to be somewhere for 30 years. Secondly, it's unheard of to make the NCAA tournament in the Sweet 16 for 16 straight years, 30 straight years in the tournament, something like that. Numbers might be a little bit off. You have guys all the way from Michael Jordan, Sam Perkins, Lenny Rosenbluth, James Worthy, Kenny Smith, J.R. Reed, Eric Montross, George Lynch, Vince Carter, Rasheed Wallace, Jerry Stackhouse. And those are guys all from my era. Then you go from, 96 on. I mean, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of players that are great. I mean, I played alongside two guys, maybe four, that are going to be in the top 50 of the NBA. When you talk about Rasheed Wallace, Jerry Stackhouse, Antoine Jameson, and Vince Carter. Those are four guys that might be in the top 50 in the history of the NBA at some point, or at least the top 100. So the talent level was unbelievable, but the tradition, the winning tradition, Coach Smith was unbelievable, and you learned so much about basketball, but also off the court you learned. The university itself, great institution. The learning that you did in the 4 or 5 years that you were there, on the court, off the court, was not comparable to a lot of places. And then you have the family. So when you graduated, you entered into the Carolina family, which dates back all the way back to the 60s. I know guys that played at Carolina from the 60s, 70s, 80s, along with 2000, 2010s, as to current guys now. So it's a big family. If you need something, you make a call. We have a group chat where the majority of the guys are on there. There might be 100 guys on the group chat. So you're always in touch, you're always communicating, and it truly is a family atmosphere. Even with Coach Smith gone, the following coaches have really done it. Coach Doherty, Coach Guthridge, Coach Williams, all those guys. And now with Coach Davis, Hubert, who was a senior when I was senior high school, so I never played with Coach Davis, but I know Coach Davis very well. He brought back all the Carolina guys that now they're on staff. I mean, it's a family, and it's a great thing to be part of. And when I talk about it, I get excited.
Well, you touched on it here a second ago. You had some teammates who were quite famous in the NBA. Some players that some of our guys may have watched or heard of, like Vince Carter, Rasheed Wallace. What was it like playing with those guys before they became stars at the highest level?
It was great. I mean, when I think of Vince, Vince ended his career as a shooter. And when Vince came to Carolina as a freshman, Vince couldn't shoot. And to see the development that he made, he was always the unbelievable athlete. He did spectacular things around the rim all the time. But to see him develop and become a passer, become a guy that could handle the ball, become a guy that could shoot the ball over the course of time. Another guy like Shammond Williams, who some of the guys might not remember, played in the NBA, played in Europe. To see his development from when he came as a freshman to the final product as an NBA player, I mean, it was unbelievable just to watch these guys get better and better and better. And it happens all the time. Antoine Jameson, the same. Rasheed Wallace, I would say, is probably the best player I've ever played with. Just unbelievable teammate, unbelievable athlete, unbelievable basketball player, IQ. Just phenomenal to be on the same team with. But those guys, I had a chance to play with guys like Rick Fox in the summer, who showed me a lot. Hubert Davis, who's now coaching, showed me a lot and taught me a lot, different things as they were playing in the pros and would come back in the summer. So all those guys, I mean, the list is endless. I'm leaving out a ton of them, but the list is endless of how many guys not only come back to Chapel Hill to help out the current guys, come back for the camaraderie, come back. I mean, it's just an unbelievable list, and everybody's a down-to-earth, just a straight guy, came out to practice, laced up their shoes, crossed the line, and went after it and got after it. Our practices, in fact, so many times, especially my first 2 years, our practices were better than the games. They were more intense than some of the games, and if you can imagine that.
Well, the last thing I'll ask you about when you were playing in college is your freshman year, you guys won the national championship. You played against a famous collegiate team in Michigan with Chris Webber, Jalen Rose, those guys. Talk a little bit about that experience going through the national tournament, winning the national championship, being part of such a historic game. What was that experience like for you?
Well, a little bit of a side there. We played them in Hawaii in a tournament it wasn't the Maui. It was one in Waikiki. I don't think it exists anymore. Maybe it exists at Thanksgiving now. We played them one year there, and it was a really nip and tuck game, just like the final was. And they won. They beat us on basically a last-second half-court shot that came up short. And I think it was Chris Webber that actually caught the ball with his back to the basket and just flipped it in, and they won by one. Then we rematched them in the finals, and I think we matched up really well with them. I mean, obviously they were very athletic, but I think we matched up well with them on all the position-wise, and they had trouble with us to defend us. But I mean, they were a really good team. I mean, it kind of puts a different taste or message in my mouth when people say, "Oh, there's a great team," because really they never won anything. They didn't win a Big Ten title. They didn't win an NCAA title. They played in the finals, and they were really a good team. But I don't think they were because they didn't win anything. It won't lift them to that next level, in my opinion. But talent-wise, they were phenomenal, and they played well together. They had swag about them. They talked a lot of trash, but in our defense, we played hard, and we just kept coming at you. We had guys like George Lynch, Eric Montross, Pat Sullivan, Derek Fells. Donald Williams had a phenomenal game in that finals, that whole Final Four. And we just kept coming right back at them. And in that game, if you recall, Chris Webber got a rebound and traveled unbelievably. And the referee didn't make the call and dribbled down into the corner and called timeout. Obviously, they didn't have any, but we had them in a pretty good position. And, I mean, everyone says, oh, Carolina won because of timeout, but I really don't believe that. We had them in a great position. He was in the corner, facing the corner with no timeouts and, a 5-second call getting ready to be called. And so, but to play and that excitement, David, to be in the Superdome with, almost 80,000 fans. I can remember going out for the shoot-around or practice the day before and asking the guy in the Superdome, why is it so cold? And they had to keep it a certain temperature because it was so big that if they let it go below a certain temperature, it would start to rain because, with the humidity rising up, it would start to actual rain inside the dome. That's how big it is. And to be in there, 80,000 people, the way that they had the arena set up for basketball, you were like taking up a quarter or like a third of the whole arena, the whole stadium. And it was incredible. It was just a monstrosity. It was the biggest place I've ever played in.
Well, let's now switch over to your professional experience. So when you first finished at North Carolina, I believe your first year, you were an undrafted free agent with the Chicago Bulls, right in the middle of their run of the second three-peat. I think if you watch the recent documentary that came out with Michael Jordan, there's even a clip with you at one of the games on that video.
In the McDonald's Open, yeah.
Yeah. What was
just
it like?
Don't blink. Don't blink because you'll miss it.
What was it like playing with those guys? Just being around those guys, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, that championship organization. What was that experience like for you?
Well, it wasn't my first year out, David. My first year I went to Livorno in Italy. I actually went to camp with Phoenix, and then I got an offer to go to Europe. I didn't get a guarantee from Phoenix, and so I went to Europe, and I had a good year, but it was a tough year. It was a big adjustment coming from North Carolina to go to Livorno. Huge adjustment for me, and had good times and not so good times, but came back the following year, decided I wanted to try to make the NBA, went to camp with the Bulls, got invited to vet camp, and got to be part of that whole situation with those guys. And probably was one of the best things I ever did, because just observing and watching the professionalism that each of those guys displayed and how they get prepared. They prepare their bodies, they prepare for practice, they stay after practice, they work. When they're in practice, they get the job done. You know, it's no BS. That was probably one of the best things I could have done. And it turned out to be something that led me to a long career in Europe, using so much of what I learned from these veteran guys that have had so much success, but yet were so business oriented, and it made a big impression on me.
So after your short stint with the Bulls, where did you go next? After that, after you left the Chicago Bulls organization, where was your next stop?
I went to the CBA. I played in the CBA for 9 games. Realized that it wasn't for me. And then I just went back to our hometown, Beaver Falls, and I just dedicated myself. I ended up moving back to Chapel Hill and basically practiced and worked out, lifted weights 3 times a day to get prepared and get ready for some of these camps so I could get another job in Europe. And that's what I did. And once I got that job, I went to Dijon in France and had a really good year. And from that point on, it just went and took off for me.
Now, you were also, I think at one point, you were part of the Euro League, so you were playing in the top level of Europe, and where, you know, teams travel to all the big cities, playing all over the continent against the top teams. I myself can speak from experience. I've played in a couple of tournaments with a couple of teams from Russia that compete in a league that competes to get into that Euro League. What was it like for you competing night in and night out at that level and going to all the nicest and biggest cities of Europe and playing over there?
Well, basketball-wise, it was great because all of the guys that you see that made the NBA or play in the NBA, all those guys played in the Euro League. They played in that situation. So, you know, I got to play against all those guys, and it was phenomenal. As far as traveling, I mean, you traveled in a good manner and stayed in nice places, got to see unbelievable. I mean, I've been to places, as you would say the same thing as a player who traveled throughout Europe, Asia, you know, and in the Middle East. I mean, you got to see so many things that you wouldn't have, and got your eyes open to so many different cultures and so many different people, and communicating with people, making, you know, eating, making conversation, making friends when you go back the next time, seeing different things, going to museums. You know, the basketball side was phenomenal, but I think the ability to put yourself into other people's lives, other people's cultures, and experience that was even better. Well, a lot of people take that for granted, but
For sure.
I tried to jump into that and see, like, when we would go to Russia, I would always try to go see something different. We'd go to Tel Aviv or Hapoel in Jerusalem. Always try to go to a different place to see something. Go to Lithuania, go to Latvia, go anywhere we'd go. I would try to do some research on the place and try to find something that I could go see and kind of take with me when I left.
Well, I think we've probably both experienced, you know, you have teammates like yourself. Now, I was that way as well, trying to get involved in the community, the different cultures, seeing things, meeting people. And then, you know, other guys stay in the room and play Xbox and, you know, order McDonald's and, you know, talk on Skype and wait for practices morning and evening. So you're absolutely right. Now, let me close this section
real quick. It was kind of funny. And you know, our time when I came to see you in Thailand and things like that, I think it was great because we would go to eat and you were like, where do you want to eat? I'm like, let's go anywhere. I'll try anything and I'll do whatever. And that's the kind of experiences that you have. So you become less afraid. And so the guys that do stay in their room, they don't get to experience any of that. And I used to try to grab guys and say, come on, let's go. Some of them would, some of them wouldn't. But no, it's something I'm just so glad that, you know, and that stems from my teammates when I was younger who did that. And so that was the first thing I got introduced to. And so I just kind of took it and ran with it.
Well, since let's close this section with the question I'm going to just add, just out of personal curiosity, that you've been to so many different places. Which city would you say has like a special place in your heart? What was your favorite place to play or your favorite place to visit out of all the places you went in Europe during your career?
That's a tough question. I loved Dijon because of the community and the people that I met there in France. As far as traveling, I mean, I loved going to Moscow. Loved when we played in Barcelona. As far as personally where I played, I mean, I loved being in Milano, in Italy, playing for Armani Jeans. I loved my last year in Napoli with the group of guys that I was playing with, and also with the coach. It was so neat. It was in the third division, so it wasn't the high level, but it was just so neat to be a part of it, and the connections and friends that I made there have lasted forever. And just trying to think some other places. Off the top of my head, it's not easy. Sevilla was a great place to go and play against their team. Malaga, the same in Spain. But again, Moscow for me was the best trip. I loved going to Moscow.
Okay. Let me ask you this question. Which you mentioned all the different coaches you played for. Obviously, there's probably some European coaches you played for that I'm not familiar with. From your answer regarding North Carolina, I think there's a special place in your heart for Dean Smith. But which guy in your basketball career, which person do you think had the greatest impact on you as both a player and a person? Maybe outside of your father, obviously. Like that's somebody that's directly related to you, your family that was there with you since you were a small child. Aside from your dad, who would you say, which figure had the greatest impact on you?
Basketball-wise, it would be John Miller, obviously, my high school coach, just because he grabbed me at a young age and really developed me. Slowly just developed me different techniques and developed my skills. Coach Smith kind of took that and ran with it. As a pro, there's a couple coaches that I really liked. One was Cesare Pancotto, another was Luca Banchi. Chris Singleton in Dijon, just off the top of my head, those guys were really, good with me, worked with me, helped me become better, not only as a player, but as a person. So that was Lino Lardo's another one in Milano who at a time was a big point in my career, and he took a vested interest in me, and I really respect him and things like that. But as far as just in general, the guy who had the most impact on me in basketball, it was John Miller. Just developed me, but he had me for 8-10 years.
Well, I think Dante, that you bring up a good point, and I think this is something that might some of our listeners might not even be aware of. But obviously, as a youth coach, you have a great impact on players because you're getting them when they're young. And when they're in their developmental years, but there's also that difference between coaching kids and then coaching grown men. So maybe you could speak a little bit as a guy who played into his 30s. Not a lot of guys have the opportunity to play as professional athletes into their 30s. What was that dynamic like with the coach as you become like a man yourself and you're married and you have children and he's talking to you're coaching and leading a group of men as opposed to kids? Like, what's that dynamic like in terms of how it changes from your youth days to your days playing as like a father and a husband and so forth?
Well, the relationship is different. Going back to Coach Miller and Coach Smith, I was a kid, and so you didn't have the relationship. Coach Smith, the relationship really changed when you left school. And as a pro, in the beginning, you got to earn the respect from the coaching staff, from your teammates, and they're going to be tough on you. But the older you get, the more you become a peer, especially, someone like me who thinks the game. And, I would go sit with some of our coaches as I got older in my 30s, and I would sit during video and I would say things and show them things, and they were real responsive and they listened. and they might not implement what I'm asking or what I'm saying, but they listened because they knew that I had an idea of how to play. And so you had that respect factor. And as long as I went out and I worked hard and I was an example for the younger guys and for the other guys on the team, you know, the older you get, the coaches have more of a leeway for you and more respect for you, in that sense, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes.
So your relationship becomes different. You still got to bust your ass, man. You still got to go after it. But your relationship becomes more of a peer and sometimes even more of a friend than it would be when you were 24 or 25 playing in the same situation.
Right. Okay, final few questions. Let's kind of transition back a little bit to just some special interest topics that I think some of the listeners would be interested in. Why don't you talk to our listeners about our own relationship, like while we were playing, how we knew each other, how our friendship developed over the years. It's probably, I think, the kids we're coaching and so forth, our coaches, it's probably something they would be interested in. So talk a little bit about like how we met, the progression of our own relationship over the years.
Yeah, so you were, 3 years younger than me?
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah,
That's
so
right.
we used to run into each other all the time at the different playgrounds or at the YMCA, and I noticed that you and then our other cohort, our guy Threezy, Mr. Stay Warm, Greg Sarcone.
Stay close.
And, stay close, that's right. Stay Warm is mine. His is Stay Close. Good correction. But I saw that you guys love to play and work, and so I was going to the Y with my cousin a lot to train and work out. And so you guys just started joining me, and we developed a friendship, and I got to play in different situations on the playground, different situations at the Y, and playing together. And I just took an interest in you guys basically because you worked really hard and then developed a friendship to this point where today, a few years ago, Greg came with me over to see you in Thailand. It was the first time Greg was ever out of the country.
Right.
And so, those things are special things, special memories. And it all ties back to, David, love of basketball and willing to work hard and just willing to go that extra mile to try to be the best you can be. And guys that do that see that in others. And so, I had guys that took me under my wing. And so when I saw you guys work your butt off, I tried to take you with me a little bit. And the friendship just developed to the point where it is today. Like, hopefully I'm going to be coming back to Thailand sometime to work with the kids and to catch up with you and do things like that with your program. So hopefully that'll transpire and just continue.
Well, as you mentioned something really important there, as we try to develop the basketball culture here where it's really still developing and growing. Like, as a guy, where we're from, what you just said there, somebody took you under their wing. So it's the same thing, right? Like, you were a guy that helped me when I was a younger player. And then there's that motivation then for me to help somebody else, and that kind of continues. When you see a guy that you take that interest in, then I was able to get a scholarship in college and I was able to play a little bit overseas. Like, how does that feel for you as a player that really didn't get in? I wasn't paying you or anything like that. We're just friends. To see like that you had an impact on somebody and they were able to be successful.
No, it's great because it goes back to what I was saying at Carolina. I had Rick Fox that came to me, King Rice, those guys, Hubert Davis. They helped me develop into what I could be, and I tried to do the same for other guys. It's a great feeling because you love. There's nothing better, in my opinion, than to see a guy who gives everything he has and puts all the time he can into being a better player, and then seeing it be successful. And I don't want you to think that I'm saying that if you didn't make it or somebody doesn't make it, it's not successful, because it's still going to teach you life lessons. It's still going to guide you in whatever you decide to do. You're going to have that discipline and that structure. But when you do see someone that makes it, it makes it all that worthwhile. Like, I see guys now that I've helped get into college as I've been down here in Florida, and now they're moving on to playing the pro. And I'll actually, go look at their team and I'll pay to watch one of their games. And it makes me smile because I see them out there doing their thing that they worked so hard for. And I love that. It's almost like, I don't know if you remember when I came there the first time, some of the kids, the younger kids, had trouble using their left hand, dribbling with their left hand. They were just starting out. And I remember the first time I saw the guy make a left-hand layup and the smile that he had and the accomplishment that he made,
Right.
those are the things that make it worth it for me. And I love seeing that. And I'll never stop because of that. I love it.
Okay, two more questions. One, I have to ask you, having gone to North Carolina, obviously now when you watch sports talk shows, everybody's, the big conversation they always love to have is who's the greatest player of all time. Obviously, you went to Carolina. Michael Jordan played at North Carolina. We had another former NBA player on our show who believed that, Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time. What is your opinion on that? Is it Michael Jordan? Is it one of those older guys? Is it a younger guy that's playing today? Like, what's your opinion and take on that question?
First off, when you say talk shows, I'm not a big talk show guy. And the reason is because you have guys that have never, ever stood up at that high level that will criticize every move that these guys make, not understanding how tough, right, how fast the game is, how explosive, how strong everybody is. I was in a bar the other day, and I was just eating. I wasn't watching the football game. And a quarterback, instead of trying to escape or whatever, just fell down because he knew he was going to get sacked. So he didn't take a big hit. And there's people at the bar, oh, what a, I don't want to say the words on the podcast here, but what this, what that. And I just turned around, I said, hey, man, have you ever had a 325-pound, 6% body fat, chiseled dude running full speed, getting ready to bury you into the ground? Have that ever happened to you? You have no idea what you're going to get ready to get hit with. And it just, a lot of the guys on these talk shows don't have that experience. And nothing against them personally, but they're trying to get viewers and stuff, so they say these outrageous things. Right. So I'm not big into that, number one.
Okay.
Number two, give me the competition. If there is a competition for the GOAT, who's in the running?
I mean, so you have your usual suspects, I think, that go along with Michael Jordan would probably be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Wilt Chamberlain, and LeBron. I mean, those are probably the names that come up most frequently. Those four players, I would say.
Well, I think that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar has a case. When you think about it, there were two rules made against him. Well, actually, one rule, and then he developed something that was unstoppable. Is he still the leading scorer of all time in the NBA?
He is, yes.
Okay. He was an unbelievable player. He had this guy hook that was unstoppable. You couldn't defend it. You couldn't stop it. And then they banned dunking for him and Chamberlain. So, you gotta take those into consideration. They're making rules against a guy who could do these things almost every time down the court, and they're making rules so he can't do it. Chamberlain, another one. I get a kick out of people saying, oh, well, Chamberlain didn't play against these athletic big guys. There were big guys at that day. It wasn't like all the guys were small. But he was just such a mammoth guy. And, he might not have had the jump shot, the skills like that. But he was a great passer, great rebounder, and could score. Obviously, to defend Michael Jordan, it wasn't one guy. It was more than one guy. And teams had, you have the Pistons that made the Jordan rules. And you're also playing in an era that was much different than the era is today. Half to 60% of the fouls that are called today were not called in that era.
Right.
And Jordan used to take a beating and would get up and come back for more. And he's not the only one. Isaiah Thomas took a beating. It was just that era. Dominique Wilkins, Clyde Drexler, all those guys that were the elites of that time period took a beating. In today's game, much different. So, not saying that today's guys aren't talented. They're very talented. They're very athletic. But I find it very difficult to compare a guy like LeBron James to Michael Jordan because two different eras. I don't see what I see on the court today. I don't think, unless he would have totally been different, which could be the case, I don't think LeBron James plays in that era. Talent-wise, yes. Ability-wise, yes. But toughness-wise is different. And that's not an insult to him. I'm not being insulting to him or today's players because it's just the way the game is today. but it's really difficult to compare those two eras, in my opinion.
As well as that era of older players, the guys.
Yeah, it's different. You're dealing with three different situations.
Let me ask you this, because maybe I don't know if you've ever had this conversation with your dad. Obviously, he was a professional player playing in that closer to that era with guys like Wilt Chamberlain and those guys. Have you ever had a conversation with him about like his opinion, like who was the best player for him from that era of players like 60s and 70s? Who did he think was the best player?
I've never had the actual conversation of who the best player is. We did have a conversation about the style. And, it also makes me kind of chuckle when people say that today's athletes they jump better or they're more athletic. And I don't think that. I just think that the actual style of the game was different. Now, when you go back to the 50s, yes, the basketball has evolved. The moves have evolved. I guess the athleticism using the moves and doing different things has evolved. But you can't tell me that Michael Jordan or Rasheed Wallace or Jerry Stackhouse wasn't as athletic as some of these guys now. You understand where I'm coming from?
Yeah. Well, I guess my question is more along the lines of like those older guys. Like you were saying, people always make the comments like Wilt wasn't playing against anybody, or maybe Kareem wasn't as good as the numbers look because guys back then weren't as strong. Or that's why I thought like maybe your dad might have had some perspective on those older players, really haven't seen them play and come up in an era where a lot of those guys were playing.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, but I really have not had that conversation with him. But I'm actually going to. You kind of sparked that. I'm going to ask him, see what he says.
I'd really be interested to hear what he says about Wilt Chamberlain, because I can remember one time long ago, obviously, Norm Van Leer is from our area, and he was running a charity program. I had an opportunity to be there. He was doing an outreach, and he was actually a broadcaster for the Bulls. And I remember some of the guys that I were with were arguing with him about who was the greatest center. And he had made a comment that at that time, Wilt Chamberlain was the greatest player ever, at least at the time that he made the comment, saying that like defensively he impacted every position because of his size and athleticism. That, like a player like Michael Jordan or LeBron James, they can lock down on one guy and really shut them down. They're great defenders. But when you're 7'1" and long and strong and athletic, you have a defensive impact on every player on the court. And that was the first time I really started to think of those older guys as possibly like being in that conversation legitimately. And as like you said, you start doing the research, you find like, oh man, every team had a 7-footer. Oh, they were playing against like these guys, Nate Thurman, Willis Reed. There's all these good big guys there. And the game was kind of geared differently where, teams they could double and triple team those guys more easily because guys weren't shooting 3-point shots. There wasn't the same spacing. When you actually watch some of the videos, you think to yourself, man, how did this guy score 50 points a game when there's a big guy out there? You got 4 or 5 guys around him. Other guys aren't really shooting the ball that much outside of 18 feet like they do today. So I would be really curious to get the perspective from your dad. Maybe that's something you can share with me, and we can have like an update for your viewers. Or maybe even one day we can interview your dad. I think that would be another interesting video to have the opportunity to talk to somebody who played professionally in that era, and then kind of get his take on how things have transitioned and evolved into today. I'd be interested to hear that take.
If you're going to want to do that, you got to make sure I'm with him, because the technology part of his world is not this.
We'll do it. We will set that up. I think that's something our viewers would be interested in, that from the standpoint of like actually hearing from because your dad played in the 60s, is that correct, as a professional?
60s and 70s, yeah.
Yeah, so he
was in college from till 70 and then went to play.
Yeah, so to get the perspective from a pro that actually played at that time, I think would be an interesting perspective, because you always hear the stories, people giving their, conjecture, like you said, but now you have an opportunity to talk to somebody that is actually playing with or against those guys to actually say what it was like compared to how basketball is now. So we'll try to set that up.
Yeah, and one name we left out, David, that had an unbelievable impact is Bill Russell, defensively, and just having the impact. I mean, another big guy from that era. Phenomenal.
Yes. Okay, last thing I just want to talk to you about is just, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about what you're doing now, what life after basketball has been like, just give them an idea of like where you're at this point in life.
Okay, I retired in 2011 and got right into coaching. I've coached at the college Division I level, Division II level, NAIA level, coached in third division in Europe, top division in Europe, both in Italy. Coached at the high school level at Montfort Academy, which is probably the best high school in the country for basketball-wise. Recently, I just got out of coaching, and I'm going to focus more on training and development of kids and players from a youth standpoint all the way up to pros, and also going to incorporate a training style, like a physical training style, not with weight room or anything like that, but with a thing called Monster Vertical Power, which I'm going to bring to Pittsburgh as I'm moving back to Pittsburgh. I don't know if you knew that, David, but I'm moving back to Pittsburgh. And so I'm going to bring that back, and we have a facility to do it. And I'm going to try to give back to the community area where I came from and try to help kids get to the level and get to the dream that I had and try to accomplish that. And one other thing I want to add, I forgot to add when you were asking me about recruiting in this, and for the kids in Thailand, the foreign kids, never be ashamed of Division I, II, III, NAIA. If you get the opportunity to come, do it, because all levels of basketball are very good. I've coached at all the different levels. The only one is Division III, but I've seen Division III play, and there's a lot of talent on the floor. No matter what level you go to, you're gonna be in a tough situation. You're gonna play against guys that can really play basketball. And so you know, in the States here, you always hear guys say, "Oh, I want to go D1," and D2 comes, "No, I'm a D1 player." Take advantage of any opportunities you get. Don't throw anything away.
Okay, it's good advice. Coach, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to the basketball community here. It's great to hear that you're moving back to Pittsburgh and giving back to the community. That's something they sorely need, and I'm sure there's a lot of kids that are going to benefit from that. And I look forward, of course, we're going to have another conversation about some of the projects we're doing here at a later time soon. And I really look forward to trying to bring your dad on. I think it will be an interesting interview to talk to a professional player from such a long time ago to kind of give perspective to the basketball community and the listeners of what basketball was really like from somebody that played at that level and what they think about how the game has progressed over time. I think it'll be great insight and a great perspective to give.
Yeah, one of these days, maybe we can set it up and I'll get you on a call with him and you can tell him what you want to do. I think he'd love to do it.
Okay, sure. That'll be great.
And I would love to come back there and work with the youth of your program and the youth in Thailand and wherever. Looking forward to doing that again.
Well, I know a lot of people here still speak fondly of you, remember you being here, so for sure we got to bring you back. No doubt about it. Now that you're moving back to Pittsburgh, you might have more time being there.
I'll have a ton of free time. No more obligations as far as recruiting, season, all that stuff. So I can pick and choose different things. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it, David. Looking forward to it.
Okay, great. I look forward to talking to you about some of those ideas, things we're trying to do here. And like I said, thank you for your time. And look forward to talking with you and your dad again in one of the shows coming up here in the not-so-distant future.
Perfect. Let's make it happen.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right. See you, man.
Yeah.